Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Now, Terminator 2 came out in 1991, and this, of course, is a sequel to the 1984 science fiction classic, The Terminator. Now, Terminator 2, it's one of those sequels that a lot of people do consider to be better than the original. Like, it's kind of like Aliens or The Godfather Part 2 or Dawn of the Dead or The Road Warrior or The Dark Knight. Like, it's one of those sequels that a lot of people consider to have surpassed the original and also really does surpass the original in a lot of ways. Now, it's hard to say whether or not I like this one better than the first one because, in my opinion, Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 are two very different films. Like, yes, they are both in continuity with each other, but they're both very different films in a lot of ways. I compare it to the differences between Alien and Aliens. The first Alien movie was very much a horror film, and Aliens was much more of an action movie. It's kind of the same thing with this. The first Terminator movie was very much a science fiction horror film, and this one is much more of a science fiction action film. So I kind of like both movies, but for different reasons. But one thing that I do feel like this movie has above the original is the first Terminator movie was, for the most part, just a popcorn flick, but this movie, while still being a popcorn flick, while still very much being a special effects driven action movie, in this movie there's definitely a message in it really about the human condition. Now, in order to really explain the plot of this movie, I do kind of have to give away a bit of a spoiler of what happened at the end of the first Terminator movie. Now, in the first Terminator movie, Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese started to fall in love with each other, and there was a scene in that movie where they had sex, and you realize that Kyle Reese was actually John Connor's father, which makes it kind of ironic because in the first movie, when you heard Kyle Reese talk about John Connor, it was clear that Reese very much looked up to John as almost like a father figure, which makes it very ironic given that Kyle Reese is actually John Connor's father. Now, at the end of the first Terminator movie, Kyle Reese is killed and Sarah manages to destroy the Terminator. So in this movie, you realize that in between Terminator 1 and this movie, Sarah Connor has been raising John and training him to become this military leader because she realizes that one day he will become the savior of the human race. But in between movies, there was a certain point where she actually tried to blow up Cyberdyne, which is the corporation that would end up in creating Skynet. So she got arrested and she was put in a psychiatric hospital, and John was put in the care of foster parents. So the plot of the movie is a cyborg made out of liquid metal called the T-1000 is sent back in time to kill John Connor, and the T-1000 can actually take on different forms. So with the T-1000, it takes on the form of a police officer, and it's sent back in time to kill John Connor. So in the future, John Connor actually reprograms a Terminator and sends that back in time to protect John. So in this movie, you basically have two Terminators, a good Terminator that's trying to protect John Connor, and an evil Terminator that's trying to kill him. So in the movie, John and the Terminator manage to help Sarah escape from the psychiatric hospital when the T-1000 goes there to kill her, and at first she really does not trust this Terminator that's helping John, because it's also the same model of Terminator that was sent back to kill her in 1984, so it's understandable that she doesn't really trust it yet. But throughout the movie, John and the Terminator start to develop almost like a father-son kind of relationship with each other, and now they're getting the idea that what if they could actually prevent Skynet from ever existing and actually prevent this nuclear war that Skynet would start in the year 1997. So that's the basic plot line of the movie, is John, Sarah, and the Terminator are now trying to prevent Judgment Day. Now, Terminator 2 is a great freaking movie. It really is. Now, once again, it is hard to say whether I like this more than the original, because I like this and the original both for different reasons, but there's no denying that this film was revolutionary in terms of special effects. Like, the film uses CGI effects for, like, when you see the T-1000 melt down into liquid metal, and most of the CGI effects in this movie still hold up today. In fact, some of it looks even better than a lot of CGI effects you see now, but it's a very interesting mix between CGI effects and practical effects. Like, the film really does mostly use practical effects. It really only uses CGI effects for effects that can't possibly be done without CGI, which is, in my opinion, how CGI should be used. Like, and, really, like, I'll admit, there are some parts of the movie where the effects don't really hold up that well, but for the most part, I would say that the effects in this movie really do still hold up today, and this film was just revolutionary in its effects, because at this time, CGI was a relatively new thing, and let's put it this way, a lot of the CGI effects that you see in movies from the early 1990s really don't hold up that well, but really I would argue that this and Jurassic Park are probably the two most revolutionary special effects-based movies to come out in the early 90s. But one thing that's really nice about this movie is, yes, it is a very special effects-heavy movie, but really the story does come first. It comes before the special effects, and this film does have a great story to it. But one thing that I really love about this movie, that I do think this movie has over the original, is in the film there really is a commentary on the human condition. Like, the film, a lot of the film asks the question, what does it mean to be human? And throughout the film, John Connor is actually trying to teach the Terminator, the good Terminator, how to be human, and there's like a great scene in the movie where the Terminator asks John, why do you cry? Like, he's trying to figure out, why do humans cry? Because the Terminator doesn't understand human emotions, and John, of course, being a little kid, can't really articulate the complexity of human emotions, so he can't really explain it to him that well, but by the end of the movie, the Terminator says to John, I know now why you cry, but it's something I could never do. So you really do get the idea that the Terminator, though it's a machine, is starting to get a soul. Now, in the movie, Sarah Connor has this dream, and this is one of the most horrifying dream sequences I've ever seen in a movie, but also one of the most powerful sequences I've ever seen in a movie. Basically, in this dream, Sarah Connor, she's at a playground, and she's right behind the fence of the playground, trying to warn the people there that bombs are about to go off. Like, this is right before Judgment Day is about to happen, and she sees herself in the playground playing with an infant John, and she's screaming to them, warning them that the bombs are about to fall and all that, and then you see a nuclear explosion happen, and you see all these, like, mothers, like, hugging their child as they go on fire and turn into ashes, and it's a horrifying sequence in the movie, but also a very powerful sequence. Like, it's showing really the loss of innocence that's going to happen when Judgment Day happens. Now, the movie also does seem to have kind of an anti-war message. However, it's nothing that I consider to be preachy or anything. Like, in the movie, you realize that Skynet was created as a missile defense system, so it was created for purposes of war. And also, there's a great line in this movie where Sarah Connor, she confronts the man who actually created Skynet, and she says to him, "Men like you created the hydrogen bomb." So there definitely does seem to be an anti-war message in this movie. However, I don't think it's preachy or anything, or at least I don't consider it to be preachy. There's also a great line at the end where Sarah Connor says, "If a machine, a Terminator, can learn the value of human life, maybe we can too." So the film definitely, it has kind of an anti-war message to it, but also very much has a message about humanity and about mankind's place in the universe. Now, in this movie, you really do get to know the guy who created Skynet, who's a man named Miles Dyson. I think I'm saying his last name right, and he's actually a really likable character. Like, even though he did create a computer system that will one day destroy the human race, he's not a bad character, though. He actually reminded me a lot of the character of Victor Frankenstein. Like, he's a scientist, but he's a good person who just doesn't realize that playing God has very dire consequences. So I definitely got kind of a Frankenstein-like vibe from the character of Miles Dyson, but it almost seems like, though, that James Cameron almost wanted you to more compare the character of Miles Dyson to Robert Oppenheimer, the man who actually created the atom bomb. Now, both this movie and the first one offers some very interesting concepts into the idea of time travel. For example, you realize that Kyle Reese was John Connor's father, but John Connor is the one who sent Kyle Reese back in time. So, who was John Connor's father when the whole time loop began? Or did it ever begin? Is it just a never-ending time loop that never had a beginning and will never have an end? Like, can the past really be changed? Can the future really be changed, or is time already predetermined for us? Like, do humans even have free will? So it offers some very thought-provoking concepts into the idea of time travel. And another thing that's interesting is you realize that Miles Dyson pretty much got the idea to create Skynet from looking at the remains of the Terminator from the first movie, so you really do get the idea that both John Connor and Skynet were both born out of a time paradox. Now, the movie also does seem to have some religious undertones to it, but it's nothing in your face or anything, but like, they call the day that Skynet launches this nuclear war Judgment Day, and Judgment Day, of course, is supposed to be the day when God brings about the end of the world and judges all mankind. Now, in the Terminator universe, you realize that Judgment Day was not brought about by God, but it was brought about by mankind trying to play God. And also John Connor, the way he's talked about in the first one and the way he's talked about in this one, he very much does come off as being almost like a Christ-like figure, like he's supposed to be the savior of the human race. So, there are some religious undertones to the movie, but it's nothing like in your face or anything. Sort of like the anti-war message in the movie. It's definitely there, but I don't consider it to be in your face. I don't consider it to be preachy by any means. Now, in the film, Arnold Schwarzenegger reprises his role as the Terminator, even though technically he's not playing the same character. Like, it's supposed to be the same model of Terminator that you saw in the first one, but it's not supposed to be the same Terminator, though. Like, Schwarzenegger really does do a good job in this movie as a cyborg, really trying to understand human empathy. Now, in the film, Edward Furlong plays John Connor, and he does a pretty good job in this movie as well, and I believe this was actually his first movie, and it really is his most famous movie. Like, he has been in a lot of stuff after this movie, but I don't think anything he did after this was ever quite as well known as this movie, and I do feel like he's always going to be remembered as the kid from Terminator 2. Now, Linda Hamilton reprises her role as Sarah Connor, and she gives a great performance in this movie. Like, in this movie, one thing I found to be really interesting about the character of Sarah Connor is she really is trying to, the same way that the Terminator is trying to gain his humanity, Sarah Connor is trying to gain back her humanity, which she kinda lost from all the years she spent in a psychiatric hospital, and she really does do a great job in this movie. Now, Robert Patrick played the villain of the movie, the T-1000, and the T-1000 is one of the most shit-your-pants scary villains I think I've ever seen in a movie. Like, if I had the horrible choice of being locked in a room with the Terminator from the first movie or the T-1000, I will take my chances with the Terminator from the first movie, because the T-1000 is a legitimately scary character. Now, in the movie, John Connor's foster mother is played by Jenette Goldstein, who is also in movies like Aliens and Near Dark. Now, John Connor's foster father in this movie is played by Xander Berkeley, who, besides this movie, I've always known him best as Trevor from the first Candyman movie. Now, in the first Terminator movie, there was a criminal psychologist named Dr. Silberman, and that same character comes back in this movie, played by the same actor, and in this movie, he's Sarah Connor's psychologist at the psychiatric hospital, and he is such a douchebag in this movie. Like, I really wanted to punch this character in the back of the head. Now, this edition of Terminator 2 that I have is the special edition, which includes some scenes that were not in the theatrical version. One of those scenes is a scene where Michael Biehn reprises his role as Kyle Reese in a dream sequence. Apparently that scene was not in the theatrical version, but it is in the special edition of the movie. And the special edition of Terminator 2 is the version of the movie that I grew up on. I don't know if I ever saw the theatrical version. I may have seen it once, but a long time ago. Really, it's this edition of the movie that I really grew up on. Now, once again, Terminator 2 Judgment Day is an excellent movie. Like, it really is a great science fiction action movie with a very powerful message in it about the human condition. And even if you do like the first Terminator movie better, you can't deny that this film in a lot of ways became almost more legendary than the first one. Like, this is a case of a sequel that is almost more famous than the first movie. Like, I do feel like more people remember whole scenes from this movie and can quote lines from this movie more than the first movie. Now, once again, it's hard to say whether I like this or the first one better, because to me, I view the first Terminator movie and this as being very different films, but Terminator 2 Judgment Day, once again, is an excellent movie. But yeah, that's my review on Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and bye.